Can't sleep? Me neither. It's all right. We're in good company now. You and me, two minds humming quietly in the dark. So, go ahead. Fluff up that pillow, wrap the blanket a little tighter, and tell me, what time is it where you are? 2 in the morning? 3? And where are you listening from? Paris, Montreal, an Uber stuck in existential traffic? Doesn't matter. Tonight, I'm staying with you all the way through, until your eyelids grow heavy, until your thoughts start to melt into mine, until even my words become the soft rhythm that rocks you to sleep. And if you end up liking this strange little midnight chat, if you enjoy late-night philosophy with a 19th century beard and a slight identity crisis, you're welcome to like the video. Maybe even subscribe. No pressure. I won't send you notifications at 4 a.m. I don't even know how. Anyway, where were we? Yes, my name is Leo Tolstoy. That Tolstoy. Writer, thinker, complicated person, beard enthusiast. I wrote War and Peace, Anna Karenina, and enough spiritual manifestos to make your head spin if you hadn't already done that to yourself by scrolling at this ungodly hour. But long before any of that, before the writing, the preaching, the fleeing into the Russian wilderness barefoot with a notebook, I was just a boy. A lonely little boy with too much silence in his room and too many books for his own good. I was born in 1828, into a world of chandeliers and expectations. My family was noble, the kind of noble that came with ancestral portraits and creaky wooden staircases. Our estate, Yasnaya Polyana, was enormous. Picture golden fields, endless trees, a library that smelled like forgotten questions, and rooms so tall they echoed even when you whispered. And me? I was the quiet child in the corner, the one who kept asking, why? My mother died when I was 2. My father followed not long after. And that, I suppose, is where the insomnia began. I don't remember the funerals. I remember the absence. I remember standing in corridors wide enough to fit my confusion. I remember wondering why people kept disappearing and why no one else seemed to be bothered by it. The adults around me were kind. The staff was attentive. My aunts tried their best. But no one knew how to answer a child who, at 8, already suspected that reality was stitched together with meaninglessness. I started keeping a journal. I wrote down promises to myself. Tomorrow, I will be brave. I will not eat the extra jam. I will read the Psalms and feel something. The next entry usually read, failed. The bear came back. Yes, the bear. You'll hear about him a lot. My inner bear. He's the soft, heavy thing that lives behind my ribs. Not cruel, not angry, just heavy. He wakes up when I lie down, he paces when I try to sleep, and he always has questions. Maybe you know what I mean. Most children are taught to play. I was taught to reflect. I had tutors, French ones, who taught me the classics. I read them all. Voltaire, Rousseau, fables, parables, sermons, stories. And the more I read, the less I understood what I was supposed to do with it all. I devoured wisdom, the way some children devour candy, hoping one piece would taste like purpose. It never did. I once asked my aunt, "Why did God make me?" She answered, "Because He loves you." I nodded politely, went back to my room, and spent the next 3 hours wondering why love would look like this. That's the kind of child I was. And yet, they called me promising. What was I supposed to be promising exactly? That I'd become a great novelist, a moral philosopher, a public nuisance with a really intense diary? All I knew was this. I had everything, a title, an estate, education, warm clothes, and I still felt hollow in ways I couldn't explain. That's when I first learned the difference between comfort and peace, between having enough and being enough. I wasn't, or at least I didn't feel like I was. So I wrote. It started with little reflections, tiny questions folded into sentences. Writing became my way of drawing lines around the void, like building fences to keep my thoughts from running wild through the night. It helped, a little, sometimes, until the bear came back. People think I had a magical childhood, and sure, I had servants who polished my boots and read poetry in candlelight, but I also had shadows, long, intelligent shadows that knew my name and whispered it back to me when I was alone. Yasnaya Polyana was beautiful, but beauty doesn't soothe a restless soul. It just gives it better wallpaper. So there I was, a boy with too many books and not enough explanations, standing at the edge of everything, staring up at a sky too big to forgive, and wondering whether anyone knew what the point of all this was. I didn't find the answer. Not then. Not really ever. But maybe that's okay. Maybe the answer was in the asking. Maybe that's why I'm here, whispering to you now. Not because I know how to help you sleep, but because I know what it means to lie awake night after night, wondering who you are and what you're supposed to do with all this thinking. So let me stay with you a little longer. Next, I'll take you to university. Sort of. I didn't really study. I gambled. I drank. I tried to outrun the bear by dancing faster than my doubts. Spoiler, it didn't work, but it made for a very interesting phase, one full of duels, drama, and deeply questionable fashion choices. We'll get there. For now, just rest your head. I'll keep talking, quietly, until you forget you're listening. I'm not going anywhere. University. What a noble word. It sounds like a temple of wisdom, doesn't it? In reality, for me, it was more like an expensive waiting room for moral collapse. I enrolled in Kazan University with high hopes and freshly polished boots. I dreamed of becoming a virtuous man, a scholar, maybe even a statesman. I imagined myself quoting Latin while riding a horse in a dignified way, but instead I mostly learned how to cheat at cards and feel ashamed in 7 different languages. My studies? A blur. I tried philosophy, law, Oriental languages, because why not? I wanted to understand the world, or at least make it shut up for a moment. But all I found were teachers more bored than I was, dusty textbooks, and classmates who drank more than they read. I attended lectures the way some people attend church, out of guilt and with a flask hidden in my coat. Very quickly, I discovered something that would define the next several years of my life. Distraction is a powerful drug, especially when it dresses up as pleasure. Gambling, drinking, chasing women with empty compliments, and even emptier promises. I wasn't the worst of my peers, but I tried hard to be. And every morning I'd wake up with the same 2 thoughts. What have I done? And what time is tea? My journal from those years is embarrassing. A parade of lofty goals followed by spectacular failures. Tomorrow I shall fast, study, and write a reflection on the metaphysical implications of mortality. Next entry. Drank too much wine, lost 50 rubles, fell asleep in someone else's boots. At some point, I convinced myself that this was part of growing up, that sowing wild oats, or at least misplacing them in various places, was the natural course of youth. But even then, even in the middle of the chaos, there was a quiet, ache. A small voice, or perhaps the bear again, asking, "Is this it? Is this the life you're meant to build?" I didn't have an answer, so I kept moving. I dropped out of university, not dramatically, just quietly. One day I simply stopped going. I told people I was pursuing independent studies, which was technically true if you count studying the odds of a card game while half asleep in a smoky tavern. Back at Yasnaya Polyana, I tried to reinvent myself. I grew out my beard a bit, read more earnestly, tried to write something meaningful. But boredom, that sly little demon, kept crawling back. And when it did, I opened the door wide. That's when I discovered Moscow society. Balls, salons, aristocrats with too much perfume and not enough insight. I wore fine clothes, said clever things, danced clumsily. I became, in short, a tolerable young nobleman, charming if you didn't look too closely, broken if you did. And yet, I remember moments of strange clarity, walking home after a night of laughter under a sky too large for my head, the streets silent, my heart loud. I'd look at the stars and feel utterly ancient, as if I had lived for centuries and still didn't know what I was doing here. It wasn't just guilt, it was weariness, not from the drinking or the chasing, but from the pretending I didn't care, pretending I believed in the little games people played, pretending I was someone who could be satisfied by surface things. You know, people talk about losing themselves in their 20s. I didn't lose myself. I misplaced myself deliberately. I wrapped myself in distraction like a blanket and hoped the questions would suffocate underneath it, but they didn't. They got louder, more urgent. That's when I started thinking about the Army. I know, odd pivot. But I thought, if university couldn't shape me and society couldn't save me, maybe war could strip me clean. Maybe in the dirt and danger I'd find something real, something that couldn't be faked in candlelight or spun in conversation. So I packed up my confusion, my bear, and a few books and headed to the Caucasus. But that's another story. Before we get there, I want to say something to you. Yes, you, lying there, maybe a little too awake for your own comfort. If you've ever gone through a phase like this, a phase of chasing noise to drown the silence, don't worry, you're not broken, you're just human. Sometimes we stumble through all the wrong doors before realizing we were holding the key to the right one all along. So don't rush it. Don't shame yourself for drifting. That's part of the map, too. And besides, sometimes the only way out is deeper in. Now close your eyes if you like, or don't. I'm not judging. But next, I'll tell you what happened when I tried to outrun my bear. With bullets, boredom, and a battlefield, we're going to war. And ironically, it's the first time I'll start to feel something close to peace. I didn't go to war out of duty or honor or any of those big, clean words that people like to carve on marble. I went to war because I was bored, confused, and vaguely hoping that a cannonball to the chest might clarify a few things. Spoiler, it didn't. But it did make things louder, which was something. I was in my 20s, directionless, full of vague ideals and precise vices. University had failed to shape me. Moscow society had failed to interest me. My inner bear had grown fat from all the spiritual neglect. So, one day, I packed up what was left of my dignity and asked to join my brother in the army, stationed in the Caucasus. He was an officer, respected and composed. I was a young noble, with a half-written journal, a rumpled uniform, and no idea what I was doing. The Caucasus, wild, vast, utterly unconcerned with my inner turmoil, mountains that looked older than time, skies that didn't care who I was, and a kind of silence between gunfire that felt more honest than all the conversations I'd ever had in Moscow. At first, I was excited. I thought maybe this was it, the place where meaning was forged in fire and sweat. I wrote long letters about nature, about honor, about the beauty of the raw, untamed world. I stood watch at night and tried to look thoughtful. I watched the stars and pretended to be a man. But the thing about war is, it's not poetic. It's not structured. It doesn't care about your metaphors. It's mud and blood and men screaming for their mothers in dialects you don't understand. It's waiting. Endless, pointless waiting. And then suddenly, chaos. Then silence. Then guilt. I remember my first brush with death. Not my own, someone else's. A boy, barely 18, shot through the stomach. He looked surprised, like he couldn't believe it had happened to him. I watched him die. Not heroically, just slowly, confused and alone. I didn't write that part in my letters. And yet, in the middle of all that, I found something. Not peace, exactly, but clarity. A strange kind of stillness that only comes when everything else has been stripped away. The battlefield, for all its horror, had no room for pretense. You either survived or you didn't. You either helped the man next to you or you didn't. No salons, no duels of wit. Just breath or no breath. I started writing more seriously then. Not for show, not for critics, but because I had to. Because something in me needed to document the contradiction of being alive in a place designed for death. That's when I wrote the Sevastopol sketches, little stories, fragments really, from the Crimean War. Honest, ugly, human. They were published. People noticed. Suddenly, I was a voice, a writer of the people, a nobleman who told the truth. It was strange being read. I'd always imagined writing as a kind of prayer, whispered into the void just to stay sane. But now the void was whispering back. Editors, readers, praise, meaning, perhaps, number, not quite. But at least I wasn't just yelling into the wind. And yet, even as I wrote, I felt the old emptiness returning. The bear, thinner now, but still there, pacing, reminding me that survival isn't the same as understanding, that being brave on the outside doesn't fix the chaos within. Still, I stayed. I served. I watched more friends die. I watched grown men weep over letters from home. I saw soldiers risk their lives for comrades they barely knew, and I saw them steal from each other 5 minutes later. War doesn't elevate men. It reveals them. That's what I learned. One night, during a rare lull, I remember lying on the cold ground, staring up at a sky full of stars that didn't care who won. I thought, maybe the stars are right. Maybe nothing matters. But if that's true, then everything we do matters even more, because we chose it, in spite of the void. That thought stayed with me. When the war ended, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired, older, not wiser, but less willing to pretend. I returned home with medals I didn't wear and stories I didn't want to tell at parties. People called me brave. I felt mostly lost. But something had shifted. For the first time, I had seen life outside of mirrors and chandeliers. I had witnessed the raw shape of humanity, stripped of all illusions. And I couldn't go back to who I'd been before. Not completely. The writing began to change. I didn't want to impress anymore. I wanted to reach people, to connect, even if clumsily, even if painfully. Of course, I'd still stumble into vanity, into pride, into distractions and moral gymnastics. I was far from finished failing, but a seed had been planted, a seed that would grow, very, very slowly, into something like truth. So, if you're lying there tonight, feeling like you're floating in the dark, unanchored, unsure, a little battle-worn from your own private wars, let me tell you this. You're not alone. You don't have to win every battle. You don't even have to know what you're fighting for yet. Sometimes just staying alive is enough. Sometimes writing it down is all we can do. And that's what I did. Next, I'll take you home with me, back to my estate, back to a version of myself who thinks he's found purpose by writing the biggest, boldest novel Russia has ever seen. I'll try to explain everything, history, war, love, God, destiny. It'll take me 6 years, a lot of tea, and a wife who copies the manuscript by hand 7 times. But that's the next part of the story, and I'll be right here to tell it. There are some decisions you make thinking they'll take a week, and they end up consuming your soul for 6 years. That was War and Peace. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how it started. After the war, I returned to Yasnaya Polyana, home, my estate, my trees, my silence, but nothing feels the same. The house is still grand, the samovar still whistles, the mirrors still reflect a man who looks respectable. But inside, I'm different, or at least, I want to be. I've seen death. Real death. Not the kind that's whispered about over caviar, but the kind that bleeds in the dirt and doesn't make it to the epilogue. And I can't go back to writing pretty sentences about pretty people feeling vaguely sad in chandeliers. I want to say something true about Russia, about history, about us, about the great spinning mess of human existence, and of course, about war and peace, but mostly about the strange places where the two live together, side by side, like mismatched roommates who never move out. So I start writing. At first, it's a simple idea, a family saga, some soldiers, some romance, maybe a bit of Napoleon sprinkled in for drama. Easy enough, right? Ha! That bear in my chest laughed so loud I dropped my pen. Because of course I can't keep it simple. The story grows. It morphs. It swallows me whole. I read ancient histories, military maps, Greek tragedies. I study peasant dialects and battle strategies and the metaphysical implications of free will. I write during the day. I scratch notes in the margins of receipts. I scribble at night while everyone else is asleep, including, thankfully, my doubts. I rewrite the opening chapter 9 times. At one point, I decide I don't believe in plot anymore, or characters, or punctuation. I go for long walks in the fields, trying to figure out whether history is driven by individuals or by invisible tides. I return muddy and no closer to an answer. The worst part? The days when I feel like I'm close to something. Those shimmering hours when the words come fast and I think, yes, this is it. This is what I was meant to say. And then the next morning, I reread it and feel like someone else wrote it. Someone drunk, someone pretending to be me. Meanwhile, I fall in love. Her name is Sophia, intelligent, strong, brave enough to love a man whose idea of flirting is handing her a manuscript the size of a brick. We marry, we fight, we make up. She copies the book out by hand, not once, not twice, 7 times, by candlelight, with corrections, with patience. If sainthood were measured in ink stains, she'd qualify. The house becomes full. Children arrive like unexpected footnotes, crying, laughing, tumbling down the hallways while I pace upstairs, trying to figure out whether Prince Andrei should die in chapter 11 or chapter 28. I am a father, a husband, a writer, sometimes all at once, sometimes none at all. And still the book grows. It becomes not just a story, but a worldview, a philosophy, a protest against the idea that we understand anything about why we do what we do. I want the reader to see how absurd it is to believe that history is just a parade of great men. I want to dismantle that illusion. I want to say, look closer. The truth is quieter. When War and Peace is finally published, years after I started, people call it a masterpiece, a triumph, a revelation. I receive letters from generals, poets, housewives, students, even priests. They say I've captured the soul of Russia, that I've written something eternal. Eternal. What a terrifying word. Because if something is eternal, what does that make the man who wrote it? Mortal, flawed, tired. I feel no triumph, just emptiness, like I've carved out part of myself and left it on the page. What's left is silence. And the bear, of course, still there, still pacing, still whispering, now what? I thought that by writing the greatest novel of my time I'd find peace. I didn't. I found echoes, admiration, yes, but not rest. The book was supposed to be my answer, but all it did was refine the question. And maybe that's the point. Maybe great art doesn't fix anything. Maybe it just gives you a better shape to place around the chaos. A structure, a name, a place to cry where the floor won't give out beneath you. And still, I write. Because what else can I do? I write as if I'm chasing myself. As if the man I'm meant to become is always one paragraph ahead of me, ducking around the next chapter, grinning like a ghost. Now, lying here with you in this quiet hour, I wonder how much of what we create is just an attempt to be heard by our future selves, to leave a trail, a note under the pillow that says, you weren't alone, you felt this too. So if you're still awake, if you're still wondering what to do with all the thoughts that keep you turning in your sheets, let me say this. Don't try to silence them. Write them down. Speak them aloud. Let them breathe. They're not your enemies. They're just your soul, rehearsing for something real. In the next chapter, I'll try to live a normal life, raise children, love my wife, pretend to enjoy social events. I'll even write another novel, Anna Karenina. Spoiler, it doesn't end well, but that's the thing about people like me. We can imagine peace, but we're always more comfortable in the storm. I'll tell you all about it. Just stay with me a little longer. Let me tell you a secret. Writing War and Peace didn't make me wise. It made me tired. Very, very tired. People assume that crafting an epic masterpiece means you must have had divine inspiration flowing through your veins, orchestras in your brain, eagles flying across your desk, that sort of thing. Number. It was mostly me hunched over a desk in wool socks, forgetting to eat, arguing with myself about comma placement, and wondering if Napoleon should be taller. It started small. A short novel, a family, some love, some war, simple, manageable. But the story kept growing. It demanded more room, more depth, more characters, more history. The characters began behaving as if they had free will. Very annoying. I'd write one thing, and the next day they would have done something completely different while I was sleeping. if I was sleeping. And then there was the research. Oh, the research. I read everything. Military campaigns, czarist decrees, letters from sergeants, ancient philosophies, obscure battle maps. I became obsessed with the minutiae of troop formations. I could describe in detail how a cannon was loaded in 1805. And yet I couldn't tell you why I still couldn't look my own soul in the eye. I wrote in bursts, sometimes 12 hours a day, then nothing for a week, then 10 pages I'd burn in a fit of perfectionism, only to rewrite them exactly the same. My wife, Sophia, became my scribe, my editor, my anchor. She copied the manuscript by hand 7 times. 7, by candlelight, with me muttering in the corner about fate, history, and whether Prince Andrei should survive this chapter or the next. I wanted the book to be everything, a mirror of life, a philosophical treatise, a hymn to human contradiction. I wanted to prove that history isn't shaped by great men making great decisions. No, it's chaos, accidents, emotions. A battlefield is just a confused dance of hungry men, mud, and very bad timing. Victory? Mostly luck. Heroism? Mostly context. But while I was busy dismantling myths on the page, I was creating a new one in my house, that of the genius, the tormented artist, the moral authority. What a joke! I was eating too much, sleeping too little, avoiding friends, and occasionally hiding under my desk when guests arrived. Meanwhile, people in St. Petersburg were already calling me the voice of Russia. I hadn't even figured out how to fold a letter without tearing it. When the book was finally published, after years of rewriting and spiraling, it became a sensation. People wrote to me in tears. Others wrote furious rebuttals. Historians said I'd misunderstood the Napoleonic era. Peasants said I'd finally put into words what they felt but couldn't name. Someone asked if the bear in Chapter 3 was a metaphor. I hadn't put a bear in Chapter 3, but the praise didn't fill me. Not really. I should have felt complete. I didn't. I felt undone. Like I'd hollowed myself out to make space for something so large that there was barely anything left of me inside. I'd given the world war and peace, but I couldn't find either of those things in my own head. Here's the thing they don't tell you. When you pour yourself entirely into a masterpiece, there's a part of you that expects the masterpiece to pour something back into you, meaning peace, clarity, a sense of finality. Instead, all I got was silence. Not the good kind, the kind that echoes in empty halls. I began asking dangerous questions again. Why did I write all this? What good is literature? Can art save a soul? Can it even keep a man warm at night when the doubts creep in under the blanket? I knew the answer. I just didn't like it. I began to drift. I spent less time with Sophia, more time walking alone. I stood by windows like a man waiting for God to send a letter. I thought maybe if I became a better person, I'd find peace. So I made promises, dozens of them. I'd be kinder, simpler, humble. But then I'd get irritated when the tea was cold or someone misquoted Hegel in conversation. I tried to be a moral man, but I was also still, unfortunately, me. There's a quote I didn't write but wish I had. We write to taste life twice, once in the moment and once in reflection. But what happens when you taste life and find it bitter both times? So there I was, celebrated, published, revered, and in the middle of it all, I was quietly breaking. I don't tell you this to be dramatic. I tell you because you deserve to know the truth. Achieving your greatest ambition may not bring you rest. Sometimes it brings only a deeper longing. The bear doesn't go away. He just finds a nicer armchair to curl up in. And yet, I don't regret the book. Because despite everything, I know it touched something real in me, in others. And sometimes the best we can do in this strange life is name the ache. Even if we can't heal it, especially if we can't heal it. So if you're lying there tonight, wondering if anything you're doing matters, let me say this. It does. Even your confusion, even your mess, especially your mess. You don't need to write a 1,200-page novel to make your life mean something. You just have to live it honestly, fully, weirdly, like a bear in a library. Next time, I'll tell you what happened when I tried to live a peaceful family life. Spoiler, the children were loud, the tea was cold, and I accidentally wrote Anna Karenina while trying to be a better person. We'll get to that. For now, let your breath slow. I'm still here, and we're not done yet. There's a certain myth we all carry, that once we find love, plant roots, start a family, the existential bear will quietly tiptoe out the back door and let us live in peace. Spoiler, my bear brought a suitcase. After War and Peace, I thought maybe I'd earned rest, that I'd built something strong enough to stand on, a marriage, a family, a name. I had Sophia, my luminous, impossibly patient wife. I had children, so many children. I had a house filled with books, toys, crumbs, arguments, lullabies. I had everything I was supposed to want. And yet, every morning, I woke up with the same strange heaviness. Not sadness exactly, more like spiritual congestion, like my soul needed to sneeze but couldn't. At first, the routine helped. I'd wake up early, drink tea, write. The house hummed with life. Little feet on wooden floors, the clatter of spoons, the gentle thud of a toddler falling over something soft and unimportant. Sophia managed it all, like a general, but with warmer eyes. She edited my drafts, recopied my manuscripts, raised our children, and reminded me to wear a scarf. She did this for decades. I wrote and brooded. I tried to be a good husband. I really did. I loved Sophia, but I also loved solitude, silence, the inner storms I had grown so familiar with. She lived in the world. I lived slightly beside it. And then, of course, I started writing Anna Karenina. A cheerful book, right? You've read it. Or maybe you saw the movie. A woman falls in love, steps out of her marriage, suffers endlessly, and then, well, she ends her story on a train platform in a way that's not exactly ideal for digestion. People often ask me, was Anna based on a real woman? The answer is yes and no. Anna is everyone. She is desire unmet. She is the ache of a life unlived. She is the unbearable tension between freedom and duty, between the rules of society and the whisper of the heart at 2 a.m, when even the ceiling seems to be listening. But here's the secret I rarely admitted. While I was writing about Anna's longing, I was swimming in my own, not for another woman, not for another life, but for a clarity I couldn't find. I would write all morning, preach family values over lunch, and by dinner be silently wondering if any of it meant anything. It wasn't Sophia's fault, or the children's. It wasn't Russia's fault. It was mine. I was haunted by contradiction. I wanted to be simple, but I loved complexity. I wanted to be moral, but I adored beauty. I wanted to live humbly, but I also enjoyed applause. At one point, I tried gardening, real peasant-style gardening. I wanted calluses on my hands. I thought, yes, Leo, this is the path to peace. potatoes, and sweat. I lasted 3 days. Then I got distracted by an idea about horse ethics. Meanwhile, Sophia was holding it all together. She bore our 13 children with a strength I can't even begin to describe. She managed the estate, our finances, our social engagements, my manuscripts. People admired me, but really, they should have admired her. I was writing about the human soul. She was actually keeping one alive. And yet, we argued a lot. As the years passed, our love became a long, slow negotiation. I retreated more into my thoughts. She feared I was slipping away, not into the arms of someone else, but into the fog of my own unreachable ideals. I would talk about giving up our wealth, becoming ascetics, living like peasants. She would stare at me, holding a baby in one arm and my manuscript in the other, and ask if I was feeling quite all right. She had every right to be frustrated. I was a man full of demands for purity, but unable to let go of his comforts. I told others how to live, and couldn't even organize my own sock drawer. At one point, I started giving away our possessions, quietly, methodically. I gave up copyrights, jewels, the rights to my books. Sophia was devastated, not because she loved luxury, but because she loved stability. She loved knowing that the children would eat, that our home would stand, and I was too busy trying to save my soul to notice I was bruising hers. Here's the thing people forget. Family life is not a cure for existential dread. Sometimes it magnifies it. It gives you everything you thought you wanted, and then asks, gently, persistently, are you happy now? And if you're not, you start to wonder, what's wrong with you? I knew other men envied me. You've done it all, they said. A great novel, a great marriage, a great family. But I didn't feel great. I felt like a man holding a beautiful snow globe and wondering why he still couldn't feel the warmth inside. I began retreating more and more into journals, into silence. I wrote pages I never published. I questioned the meaning of love, of truth, of God, of cereal. I wondered whether we ever really know the people we share a bed with, or ourselves. And yet, every night, I walked the halls. I kissed my children good night. I returned to my desk. I lit a candle, and I kept writing. Because despite the mess, despite the contradictions, despite the bear, I knew one thing. These questions were real. And asking them, even badly, was better than pretending they weren't there. So if you're lying there tonight, wondering why you still feel empty despite everything you've built, you're not broken. You're just alive. Love isn't a solution. It's a practice, a daily art, a complicated, imperfect miracle. And yes, even the man who wrote Anna Karenina still had to learn how to listen at the dinner table. Next, I'll tell you about the moment when everything came crashing in again. When I stood on the edge of belief, not in literature or love, but in life itself. A moment so quiet, it roared. But that's for the next breath. I'm still here, and so are you. There's a moment no one prepares you for. Not in school, not in church, not even in literature. And I should know I tried writing my way around it for years. It's the moment when you realize that you've done everything right. And you still feel completely, utterly wrong. That was me, husband, father, renowned author, master of a sprawling estate. I had a wife who loved me, children who admired me, readers who worshipped me. I had the applause, the legacy, the oil portrait over the fireplace. And yet, one morning, without tragedy, without warning, I woke up and could barely breathe, not physically, existentially. It started quietly. I was pouring tea. I looked at the cup, and something inside me whispered, "Why? Why pour this tea? Why dress today? Why sit down to write more thoughts about more people in a world I no longer understood?" It wasn't sadness. It was hollowness, a silent, thick fog that filled my chest and blurred everything I once believed to be solid. I walked the grounds of Yasnaya Polyana and felt like a ghost haunting my own legacy. Nothing brought me joy. Not the trees I'd planted, not the books I'd written, not even the laughter of my children. And that terrified me. I began to think about death, not dramatically, not in some Byronic, candlelit way, just plainly, honestly. I thought, if I died tomorrow, what would it matter? The earth would keep spinning. People would keep eating breakfast. Someone would misquote me in a newspaper. That's it. I read philosophy, Schopenhauer, Pascal, the Stoics. I looked for answers in every book I could find. I even turned to science, hoping that maybe the laws of nature could provide some kind of emotional anesthesia. But everything I read just confirmed the same terrifying possibility. Life has no meaning, not unless you give it one. And maybe you can't. That's when I started hiding the ropes in the barn. Yes, that's how far it went. I didn't trust myself. I didn't want to die. Not really. But I couldn't imagine a reason to keep living either. It was like standing in a room with no doors, no windows, no furniture, just silence. And somewhere in that silence, the bear was watching me, quiet, patient, as if he'd been waiting for this moment all along. I couldn't tell Sophia. How do you explain to someone that the man they love is no longer sure he exists in any meaningful sense? That the smile he gives over breakfast is just muscle memory? I wrote instead. Pages and pages, private, shaky confessions, questions with no punctuation. And then one morning, in the garden of all places, something happened. I saw a peasant, just a man, shoeless, sunburned, humming a stupid little song while fixing a fence. He looked content, not overjoyed, not enlightened, just okay, present, alive in his own skin. I stood there, a man with fame and fortune and books translated into 5 languages, and I realized that I envied him. Why? Because he believed in something. Not God, necessarily, but in the rhythm of life, in waking up, working, eating, resting. He didn't need the world to explain itself. He simply participated in it, like a tree does, like a stone. I began to read simpler things, fables, proverbs, the Gospel of Luke, folk songs. I stopped looking for grand meaning and started listening for quiet truth. And slowly, very slowly, I began to climb out of the pit. I realized something else, too. The problem wasn't the world. It was my hunger for clarity, my obsession with making life fit into a system, a paragraph, a neat little chapter heading. But life doesn't want to be understood. It wants to be lived, felt, risked. That realization didn't cure me, but it gave me a foothold. I stopped hiding the ropes. I started planting again, not metaphorically, actual potatoes. Very badly at first. I began writing again, but with a new voice, less certain, more open. I wrote a confession where I poured all of this out, the doubt, the despair, the uncomfortable silence. Some readers thanked me. Others were scandalized. My publisher told me I should maybe take a nap. But I knew I wasn't alone anymore, and that mattered. Here's the thing they don't teach you in school. Moral collapse doesn't look like crime or addiction or scandal. Sometimes it looks like a man with everything who can no longer find the strength to tie his shoes. Sometimes it's invisible, quiet, lurking behind polite smiles and functional sentences. So if you've ever felt that, the blankness, the numbness, the sense that your life is perfectly intact but somehow missing its soul, let me say this. You are not insane. You are not broken. You are brushing up against the unbearable truth that life without love or meaning becomes unbearable. And that's not a flaw. That's a compass. You don't need to fix everything overnight. You don't need to become a saint or a philosopher or a potato farming novelist. You just need to take the next breath, and then the next one, and maybe, eventually, pick up a shovel and plant something, even if it's just a sentence. Next, I'll tell you how I tried to rebuild myself, not with fame or ambition, but with faith, the strange, trembling kind, the kind that doesn't answer all your questions, but lets you sleep a little more peacefully at night. We're not done yet. You're not done yet. I'll stay here, if you will. You probably imagine the abyss as something dramatic, a thunderstorm, a scream, a dramatic fall into darkness with violins wailing in the background. But no, that's not how it comes. At least, not for me. The abyss arrived quietly, one morning, at the breakfast table, with lukewarm porridge and an unusually silent spoon. Sophia was reading a letter. The children were arguing about sugar. The samovar hissed like it always did. And I sat there, watching my own hands, suddenly and completely convinced that I was not real. Not just unimportant, unreal. Like a character in someone else's dream, a warm, hollow fiction. I excused myself, went to my study, and stared at a wall for 3 hours. I'd already had a collapse, the tea crisis, as I now call it, but this was different. This was not despair. This was absence. I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel. That's what made it terrifying. I tried writing. The ink felt like lies. I tried praying. The ceiling stared back. I tried walking, chopping wood, even singing. Poorly, a folk song from childhood. Nothing touched the silence. I thought, maybe this is it. Maybe I've used up all my thoughts. Maybe my soul has quietly packed its bags and slipped out the side door. I wandered the estate like a ghost. I stopped answering letters. I stopped shaving. At one point, I gave away half my clothes, convinced they no longer belonged to me. I told Sophia I was reconfiguring my relationship to form. She told me to eat something. And yet, something strange began to happen in that silence, in that abyss. You know how, when you've been underwater for too long, your body suddenly starts craving air with a desperate, involuntary violence? That's what happened, but not for oxygen, for meaning. The very absence became a kind of mirror. I saw myself more clearly than I ever had before, not the writer, not the nobleman, just the human, fragile, confused, constantly pretending to understand life while secretly begging someone, anyone, to whisper the answer in the dark. I turned back to the Gospels, not the sermons, not the theology, just the words, stripped down, raw. Blessed are the poor in spirit. I didn't know what that meant before. Now I did. It meant me. I began rereading peasant tales, the ones my servants used to tell their children, stories of fools and saints and lost goats that somehow returned home wiser than the villagers. They were simple, honest, and for the first time in years, they made me smile, not with my mouth, with something deeper. That's when I started writing again, not novels, not masterpieces, just thoughts, scribbled reflections, observations about why bread tastes better when shared, about why the stars feel closer when you're alone in a field, about why the truth, the real kind, is always slightly embarrassing. I kept asking questions, but now I didn't expect answers. I began to see that maybe the point of life wasn't to solve it. Maybe it was to live it with enough courage that the questions stayed beautiful. I even stopped trying to be someone. You know what I mean? That exhausting performance we all do. Trying to be impressive, consistent, admired, quotable. I gave it up. Or at least I tried. I let myself be contradictory. Moody, generous one day, selfish the next. Human. Sophia was confused by all this. Who wouldn't be? One week I was talking about communal property. The next, I was reorganizing my sock drawer like it was the Vatican archive. I wept during thunderstorms. I fasted. I overate. I swore off books. Then I read 30 in a week. But I was alive. Fully, strangely, unpredictably. That's the day I say I met the abyss. Not because I fell into darkness, but because I finally stood still in it long enough to hear what it had to say. And what it said was this: you don't need to be exceptional. You just need to be here. I began teaching the children differently. Less doctrine, more wonder. I'd walk with them in the orchard and ask, "Why do you think that tree is bending like that?" And they'd answer, not scientifically, but poetically. "Because it's shy," one said. "Because it's trying to kiss the sun," said another. Yes, that. I started paying closer attention to the little things. How jam smells when it's hot. How old men laugh when they forget what they were saying. How a single wildflower can make a perfectly terrible morning feel a little less unbearable. I wrote less about war and more about grace. Less about destiny and more about dishes. The kind of spirituality you can find in folding laundry or listening to a child's nonsense story all the way to the end without interrupting. And slowly, very slowly, the bear in my chest stopped pacing. He didn't leave. He never does. But he curled up, rested his head, exhaled. So if you're listening now, wide awake in the soft glow of a screen or a ceiling you've already memorized, and you feel like you've hit a wall inside yourself, stay a little longer. Not here in this audio. Here in the silence, in the not knowing. It's uncomfortable, yes, but it's not empty. It's full of the life you've been too busy to hear. Tomorrow or the day after, you'll climb out of it. Or it will climb out of you, and you'll make tea, or write a sentence, or smile at someone who's still asleep. And that, believe it or not, will be enough. Next, I'll tell you about what happened when I started preaching this new truth. When I tried to share my peace with the world, and the world promptly handed it back with a very skeptical look. But that's for later. You're doing fine. I'll be here. I don't know what your midlife crisis looked like. Maybe you dyed your hair purple. Maybe you bought a motorcycle. Or maybe you tried learning the ukulele at 2 a.m. and scared your cat. Mine? I renounced everything. Wealth, fame, meat, copyrights, even buttons eventually, because when I fall apart, I don't do it halfway. I go all in. It started, as all ridiculous things do, with sincerity. I'd spent years staring into the abyss, listening to its soft, weird music, and for once I didn't want to climb out. I wanted to bring a chair, sit down, and start organizing the furniture in there. I wanted my life to match my new convictions. That simplicity was sacred, that love was everything, and that property was, well, deeply problematic. So I made changes, big ones. I gave away the rights to all my books, War and Peace, Anna Karenina, all of it. Just let them go. People thought I was mad. Sophia was livid, and honestly, who could blame her? We had 13 children and actual bills. But I wasn't thinking practically. I was thinking cosmically, eternally, radically, and yes, stupidly. I stopped eating meat. I started preaching celibacy, a difficult conversation to have with your wife, I assure you. I refused to carry money. I began dressing like a peasant, coarse tunic, rope belt, barefoot in the winter. I chopped my own wood, baked my own bread, and tried very hard to convince my friends that moral clarity was better than fresh linen. Some were inspired, others were horrified. The nobility stopped inviting me to dinner. Old literary friends avoided eye contact. Journalists came to the estate with eyebrows permanently raised, asking, "Is this performance art?" And the strange thing is, I didn't care. I believed it. Every dusty, hungry, calloused, barefoot part of it. I believed that modern life, with its possessions, pride, and Parisian shoes, was choking our souls. That joy could only be found in simplicity, in honesty, in humility, in chopping turnips at dawn and saying no to foie gras. But here's where the story begins to split, because I also enjoyed recognition. I liked the admiration. I liked the letters that said, "Your words changed my life." I liked being Tolstoy, the barefoot prophet with a sharp pen and a sharper conscience. So while I was preaching simplicity, I was basking in a kind of spiritual celebrity. Yes, I was a hypocrite, but I was a sincere one. And poor Sophia, she was still in the world I had abandoned, still balancing accounts, feeding our children, keeping the house from collapsing under the weight of my principles. She watched as the man who once scribbled love letters and epic novels slowly transformed into a vague idea in a robe. We fought, quietly at first, then less so. She said I'd humiliated her. I said she clung to comfort. We both cried, a lot. It's strange how two people can sit at the same table, eat the same bread, and live in completely different worlds. Then came the followers, the Tolstoyans, young idealists who dressed like me, quoted me, copied me. They arrived by the dozens at Yasnaya Polyana, eager to sit in the grass and ask things like, "Master, what is the truest form of kindness?" And I, hungry for meaning, desperate to be useful, answered them as if I knew. But deep down, I was still guessing, still pacing, still waking at night, staring at the moon, asking myself, have I truly found truth? Or just a more noble kind of denial? Because there's a line, a thin one, between spiritual clarity and spiritual escapism, between conviction and ego dressed in peasant clothes. And I walked that line with fraying boots and just enough self-doubt to keep going. I wrote pamphlets, essays, open letters to the Tsar. I spoke of love, pacifism, the abolition of all power. I told people to give away their last piece of bread, to forgive their enemies, to live like saints. And I meant it, every word. But meanwhile, the more I preached peace, the less I felt it at home. Sophia was drained. The children were confused. Our once joyful house, full of soup and stories, now echoed with silence. I was surrounded by followers, but I was also deeply alone. Because here's the bitter truth. It's easier to love humanity than to love the person who forgot to close the pantry door. It's easier to write a treatise on universal compassion than to listen to your spouse explain for the third time why we're out of butter. Yes, I was building a philosophy, but I was failing where it mattered most, around the dinner table, and yet I couldn't stop. I was convinced that if I just renounced enough, gave away enough, humbled myself enough, I'd reach that final summit: peace, silence, enlightenment. I never did. What I found instead was this: there is no perfect life, no final truth, no grand destination, only attempts. We try, we fail, we try again, we hurt, we heal, and if we're lucky, we soften our hearts, our judgments, our need to be right. So if you're listening now, wondering whether you need to sell all your things, renounce your job, move to the woods, and meditate until your bones vanish, I won't stop you, but I'll offer this instead. Peace doesn't live in your furniture or your lifestyle or your diet. It lives in how honestly you face yourself, wherever you are, in your kitchen, your commute, your insomnia. My crisis didn't end with transcendence. It ended in something smaller, quieter, but maybe just as sacred. The realization that I was flawed, yes, but still worthy of trying, worthy of loving, worthy of starting again. Next time, I'll tell you what happened when my ideas left the house, when the letters arrived, when strangers called me a prophet and I accidentally found myself founding a movement. But for now, breathe. You don't need to change everything tonight. You just need to rest. I didn't mean to start a religion. I really didn't. One day you're writing essays about love and nonviolence in your slippers, and the next, a group of intense young men with identical beards are pitching tents on your lawn and calling you master. It escalated quickly. It began with letters, hundreds of them, from teachers, farmers, students, soldiers, strangers who had read my books, stumbled across my essays, or heard rumors of the barefoot nobleman preaching simplicity and spiritual awakening from a cherry orchard. Many of them asked for guidance. Others sent poems. Some just wanted to tell me they too had stopped eating meat and now felt very, very hungry, but morally superior. And I replied, because I couldn't help it. I felt responsible. These people were searching, not for a theory, but for a way to live. And I thought, well, I've searched too. Maybe I can help them get a little less lost. So I wrote back, thoughtfully, passionately, exhaustingly. I offered my vision of a better world, one based on love, nonviolence, cooperation, humility. No hierarchies, no oppression, just people living close to the earth, sharing what they have, and refraining from shouting in libraries. I began to feel useful, important even, as if maybe the suffering I'd crawled through was now fertilizing someone else's hope. It was intoxicating and dangerous, because very soon people stopped seeing me as just a writer or a thinker. I became something else, a symbol, a sage, a kind of Russian Gandhi with worse hygiene. I was invited to lecture, to advise, to inspire revolutions. I declined most of it, of course. I preferred to stay home, pulling weeds and writing meditations on plowing. But the movement, what they started calling Tolstoyanism, kept growing. Communities sprang up across Russia, groups of idealists trying to live by my teachings. They rejected violence, meat, alcohol, private property, and occasionally logic. They debated endlessly over what Tolstoy would do. Some of them came to Yasnaya Polyana just to watch me eat porridge, as if that might reveal something divine. And me? I smiled politely. I tried to live by the values I preached. I tried to remind them, gently, that I was just a man. Flawed, moody, still slightly afraid of thunderstorms. But they didn't want to see the contradictions. They wanted a prophet. And when people want a prophet, even your hiccups start sounding like scripture. The irony was excruciating. I had spent years preaching against ego, against idolatry, against elevating anyone above anyone else. And now, here I was, the reluctant saint of my own accidental gospel, a walking contradiction with a beard full of metaphors. Meanwhile, my family was imploding. Sophia, who had once been my partner, my copyist, my closest friend, now saw me as a stranger. I was surrounded by disciples. She was surrounded by bills. I was dreaming of universal brotherhood. She was trying to figure out how to feed 13 children with a husband who'd given away the royalties from war and peace. We argued constantly. She accused me of abandoning reality. I accused her of clinging to the material world. We both cried, sometimes in the same room, but never in sync. I couldn't tell if I was following the path of righteousness or just losing my grip on the life we'd built. And the visitors kept coming, each one more intense than the last. A man walked 200 kilometers barefoot just to ask me if God approved of boiled cabbage. Another wanted to show me a 15-page treatise on nonviolent shoemaking. I nodded. I listened. I smiled. But inside, I was tired. So tired. At night, I'd sit by the window, watching the lanterns of carriages arriving, and wonder what monster I had birthed, not out of malice, but out of hope. That's the thing about ideas. Once they leave your mouth, they grow legs, and sometimes they come back wearing shoes you never approved of. Still, I couldn't stop. I kept writing, kept answering letters, kept trying to bridge the impossible gap between ideals and reality. I wrote about the Sermon on the Mount, about nonviolence, about loving your enemy, even when your enemy was your neighbor who played the accordion very badly and very loudly. One day, a young man arrived and sat outside my study for 7 hours, waiting for me to emerge. When I finally did, he bowed and said, "Master, I have renounced all possessions." I looked at his coat, worn, patched, and clearly inadequate for winter. "Even this?" I asked. He nodded solemnly. I told him to go put it back on. Then I made him tea. That's the thing no one tells you about being seen as a prophet. It's incredibly inconvenient. It makes it hard to sneeze, or lose your temper, or enjoy a piece of cake without someone gasping, "But I thought you had renounced pleasure." And yet, I was grateful, not for the attention, but for the proof that people were still searching, still yearning, still asking hard questions about how to live a meaningful life in a world that seems determined to distract us from it. If you're listening now, wondering whether your own search has led you too far off the map, don't worry. There is no map, only paths. And sometimes the path that looks like a detour is the one that brings you home. You don't need to start a movement or give away your shoes. You just need to stay curious, stay kind, stay soft in a world that keeps telling you to harden. Next time, I'll tell you about the letters I started writing to God, and the awkward ones I wrote to the Tsar, about the tension between spiritual peace and political chaos, about how I tried to reconcile the teachings of Jesus with a country arming itself for revolution. But for now, close your eyes if you haven't already. There's nothing to do tonight. Just listen. I'm not going anywhere. At some point, when you run out of things to say to people, you start writing to God. Not because you're pious, not because you expect a reply, but because, frankly, He's the only one left who hasn't interrupted you yet. I began writing to Him after the third or fourth time I realized I couldn't untangle the world with philosophy alone. I'd tried reason, I'd tried doctrine, I'd even tried gardening. And yet, something in me still itched, a yearning I couldn't file under ethics or political reform. So one evening, I opened a blank page, took a deep breath, and began. Dear God, followed by a very long pause. What do you say to someone who already knows everything? Worse, what do you say to someone you're not entirely sure is listening? At first, I was formal, respectful, a bit nervous, like a schoolboy writing to a distant uncle with questionable judgment. I asked about good and evil. I asked why the world feels so heavy sometimes, even on sunny days. I asked why humans love beauty, but spend so much time destroying it. I asked if he had read Anna Karenina. Eventually, I stopped asking questions and just started confessing. I don't understand myself, I wrote. I try to do good. I try to be kind. I try not to yell when the bread is burnt. But some days I feel like a saint and others like a complete fraud in a wool tunic. It felt good. Not because I expected thunderbolts or miracles, but because for once I wasn't performing, not for readers, not for disciples, just for the silence. And while I was busy with my theology of uncertainty, I also started writing to someone far less divine, the Tsar. Yes, the Tsar of Russia, emperor, autocrat, collector of medals and very tall hats. I didn't know him personally, but I felt we had things to discuss. Mostly, I wanted to ask, why are we still arresting people for telling the truth? Why are peasants still starving while chandeliers sparkle in palaces? Have you ever considered replacing the government with a few kind shoemakers and some common sense? I didn't expect him to write back. He didn't. But writing those letters felt important, necessary, like shouting into a canyon not to be heard, but to remind the canyon you're still here. Of course, people didn't like that I was doing both. Writing to God? Fine. Writing to the Tsar? Dangerous. Writing to both at the same time? Suspicious. Suddenly, I was being watched, censored, whispered about. Some said I was a genius. Others said I was losing my mind. A few thought I was plotting a revolution. I wasn't. I was just trying to start a conversation. But Russia, my beloved, infuriating homeland, was no longer in the mood for conversations. Tensions were rising, poverty deepening, the people were restless, and there I was, sitting in my orchard, scribbling moral appeals like a well-meaning goat bleating at a train. The Orthodox Church officially excommunicated me. They called me a heretic, a blasphemer, a corrupter of the faithful, which, coming from people in golden robes and jewel-encrusted hats, felt a bit rich. My response? I sighed, made some tea, and wrote another letter. If following Christ's teachings makes me a heretic, I wrote, then I wear the title gladly. A bit dramatic, yes. But I was tired, and maybe just a little proud of that line. Meanwhile, my personal life unraveled further. Sophia didn't understand this new phase. She tried. But I was drifting further into abstraction, and she was tethered to the reality of laundry, ledgers, and children with fevers. She wanted a husband. I wanted to be a conduit for divine moral reform. You can see how that creates tension. One afternoon, she found one of my letters, not to her, not to God, not even to the Tsar, but to humanity, a rambling essay about love, forgiveness, property, and my belief that true Christians should not own things. She read it in silence. Then she asked, "Does that include your family?" I didn't have a good answer. The truth is, I was trying to write my way to salvation. And salvation, as it turns out, is not a genre God seems to read very quickly. Still, I wrote every day, letters, diaries, tracts. Sometimes I didn't even know who I was addressing anymore. God, myself, my future readers, a lonely shepherd in the Caucasus with a moral itch. I hoped someone would hear me, or at the very least, that the act of speaking would make me less afraid of the silence. If you're lying there tonight, staring at the ceiling and wondering whether anyone's listening to you, let me tell you this: someone is, even if it's only your own soul waiting for your voice. Speak, write, whisper, even if it's just to say, "I'm still here." The next part of the story gets heavier. My ideas, once simple, begin to spiral. My disciples grow more intense. My family life fractures. And eventually, I find myself standing on the edge of everything I built, with a packed bag, an old coat, and a plan to walk away from it all. But that's another night. For now, stay where you are. You don't have to write to anyone. You just have to rest. And I'll be right here, waiting for the next page. There are few things more awkward than accidentally starting a cult. One minute, you're sharing ideas about compassion and simplicity, maybe handing out a pamphlet or two. And the next, there's a group of young men in identical linen tunics calling themselves Tolstoyans, refusing to wear shoes and debating whether it's ethical to step on a beetle. And it's not like I invited them. They just arrived, one by one, then by twos, then by cartload. They set up tents near the orchard, read aloud from "The Kingdom of God is within you," like it was scripture, held meetings where they quoted me more accurately than I remembered writing. I would open my window in the morning and see them doing communal stretching exercises, reciting lines like, "Private property is the root of evil, and Tolstoy says we must renounce desire." I nearly shouted back, "Tolstoy also says we should eat breakfast first." But they looked so serious, so sincere. At first, I was flattered. What writer doesn't dream of being misunderstood with enthusiasm? They told me I had awakened their souls, that I'd given them purpose, that I was their teacher, their prophet, their North Star. I told them, very gently, that I was just a man with a beard and unresolved issues. They nodded solemnly and said, "Exactly?" They tried to live out my teachings to the letter, though which letter they were never quite sure. One group refused to eat anything that had cast a shadow. Another held an 11-hour discussion about whether sweeping a floor might be an act of violence against dust. They meant well, but soon my estate stopped feeling like home and started feeling like the world's strangest summer camp. They asked questions constantly. Is it moral to own a comb? Is music indulgent? Would Leo Tolstoy wear suspenders? And I, foolishly, tried to answer them at first, but after a while I realized I had created something I couldn't control. My thoughts, once fluid, evolving, had been fossilized into doctrine. My contradictions, my doubts, my vulnerable wrestling with life had been turned into commandments. I wasn't allowed to grow anymore. I was a statue now, one they expected to speak only in parables and eat only lentils. It got worse. Some Tolstoyan colonies popped up in other cities, little experiments in perfect moral living. They rejected modern medicine schools, even books not written by me. One man wrote to tell me he had burned his entire library to cleanse his mind. I sent him a copy of the Brothers Karamazov and told him to start over. And yet, part of me understood. They were just doing what I had done, trying to find clarity in a world that didn't offer any. They wanted rules, certainties, a way to make the ache go away. But I couldn't give them that, because I was still aching too. Meanwhile, back home, Sophia was losing her patience. She didn't ask for any of this, the tense, the chanting, the excommunication. She wanted her husband back, the man who used to read her drafts and ask her opinion before publishing moral manifestos. Now I was surrounded by strangers who thought they knew me better than she did. Our dinners became tense, me talking about the divine spirit within every man, her reminding me that the divine spirit still needed to help with the dishes. Sometimes I wished I could split myself in two, let one version stay and write philosophy, and let the other just be a husband, a father, a man who remembered how to laugh. But no one wanted that version of me, not even me. The truth is, I had become addicted to my own righteousness. Every time I felt confused or afraid, I just tightened the moral screws a little more, eat less, speak less, want less. And still, I didn't feel free. One night, a young Tolstoyan knocked on my door holding a beetroot and asked if I would bless it. I told him it was already blessed, and that he should cook it before it became philosophical. He thanked me, as if I'd just revealed a great secret of the cosmos. I went back inside and cried into my soup. I realized then that I was losing control, not just of the movement, but of myself. What had started as a genuine search for truth was slowly becoming performance. And I was tired of performing, so I tried pulling back. I told my followers to question me, to think for themselves, to read other authors, to disagree with me. Some left, others nodded, wrote that down, and added it to the canon. Tolstoy says, question everything, including Tolstoy. I sighed. If you're listening now and wondering whether your own ideals have started to feel like chains, ask yourself this. Are you living your truth or someone else's version of it? Have you turned your doubts into doctrines just to feel safer? It's okay if you have. We all do it sometimes. The trick is remembering that truth isn't something we possess. It's something we approach, humbly, clumsily, and often while wearing socks that don't match. Next, I'll tell you what happened when love, the one thing I thought I understood, began to crack under the weight of all these beliefs. When Sophia and I found ourselves no longer arguing about ideas, but about the very foundation of what kept us side by side. Love, it turns out, is harder than philosophy. Much harder. But we'll get to that. For now, rest your eyes. You don't need to follow anyone tonight, not even me. Love is a battlefield, they say. I say, love is a country estate with 13 children, a kitchen full of noise, and a husband who just gave away all the copyrights to war and peace in the name of spiritual rebirth. Poor Sophia. She married a novelist, She got a moral revolutionary in sandals, preaching chastity while still fathering enough children to form a small parliamentary committee. In the beginning, we were a team. She was my editor, my critic, my partner. She copied War and Peace by hand multiple times while pregnant, managing the house, and fielding my endless philosophical monologues about meaning and mortality. I adored her. I did. But adoration doesn't make you easy to live with when your idea of romance involves rejecting private property. As my spiritual crisis deepened, so did the cracks between us. I renounced meat, wealth, and comfort. Sophia renounced my nonsense. She was practical, grounded, a mother, a manager, a woman who'd spent too many nights worried about heating bills and fevers. I floated higher and higher into abstraction. She clung to the earth, and that distance hurt more than either of us could admit. Our fights were quiet at first, little sighs at dinner, long silences in bed. Then came the outbursts. "You love the peasants more than your own family," she said once. I didn't know how to answer. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was so determined to be good that I'd forgotten how to be kind. She wanted a husband, not a prophet. She wanted help with the children, not essays on pacifism. And I wanted to dissolve into light, to strip away everything false, even her love, if it stood in the way. We started to live in parallel realities. Mine filled with idealism, hers with diapers, budgets, and the weight of being married to a man who refused to sign publishing contracts. We kept going, of course, because love is stubborn, because we had history, because when you've spent decades sharing a pillow, even pain becomes familiar. But sometimes I wondered, had I created an impossible standard? Had I loved the idea of goodness more than the people closest to me? She tried, you know. She really did. She read my books. She debated me. She watched our friends drift away, watched our estate fill with barefoot disciples, quoting me back to myself. And still, she stayed. Through it all. And I grew more distant. I filled my journals with guilt. I stopped laughing. I lectured about purity with the same mouth that used to kiss her neck in the orchard. I believed I was doing what was right. But right doesn't tuck the children in. It doesn't hold a trembling hand at midnight. It doesn't whisper, "I'm sorry," when you forget to say it out loud. If you're lying in bed tonight thinking about someone you love or used to love and wondering why it feels so hard, know this: it's not supposed to be easy. Love isn't clean. It's messy, repetitive, unfinished. It's not the novel. It's the margin notes, the arguments about soup, the soft glances across a crowded table. There were good days, still. Days when we laughed, when we danced in the hallway like fools, when the children screamed and we just let them. Moments when we remembered who we used to be. But they slipped through our fingers like water. And we were tired. Eventually, I began to dream of escape, not because I didn't love her, but because I no longer knew how to reach her, or myself. I imagined leaving, disappearing quietly, like a character exiting stage left. No drama, just absence. And one day, I did. But that's a story for later. For now, if your heart is sore, if you're holding on to something complicated and old and full of echoes, know that I understand. Even Tolstoy's can't solve the riddle of love, especially Tolstoy's. Close your eyes now. You don't have to fix anything tonight. Just breathe. Just rest. I'm still here. Have you ever stared at the ceiling and suddenly thought, What if I die? And it was all meaningless. No? Just me? Well, let me tell you about the time I wrote a short story that kept even me awake at night. It's called The Death of Ivan Ilyich, and it is by far my most honest work. Not because it is elaborate, but because it is stripped to the bone. A man, a death, a slow realization. Ivan Ilyich is an ordinary man, successful, proper, utterly forgettable. He lives exactly the way society tells him to, by the book, by appearances, by the rules. He marries the right woman, climbs the right ladder, wears the right hat. And then one day, he gets a pain in his side, just a little one. But it doesn't go away. It gets worse, then worse. And suddenly, he's dying, and the horror begins. Not just the physical pain, though that too, but the psychological earthquake. What if I lived all wrong? What if everything I thought was important wasn't? That, dear insomniac, is the real sting of death. Not that it comes, but that it might reveal the falseness of everything we built. I wrote Ivan in a fever. Not literally, although I did have a cold, but spiritually, mentally, feverish, because I was Ivan. I had known luxury, social approval, routine. And I, too, had once believed that if I did what was expected of me, life would protect me from the abyss. Spoiler, it doesn't. Ivan fights, he denies, he argues, he pleads, and then, eventually, he accepts, he surrenders. Not with defeat, but with an almost luminous grace. In the final pages, just before death takes him, he sees something pure. He lets go of pride. He forgives. He stops fearing. That, to me, was the closest I ever came to understanding peace. Writing that story changed me, not all at once, but it cracked something open. It showed me that simplicity is not just a virtue, it is a final refuge. That truth is not always loud. Sometimes it whispers from a deathbed. It made me want to live differently, not dramatically, not publicly, but internally. I began to question every mask I wore, every performance, every word I said that wasn't entirely true. If you're still awake, I wonder, what performances are you giving? What ladders are you climbing? And do they even lean against a wall you believe in? Have you ever paused, like Ivan, and thought, what if I've missed the point? But here's the thing. Ivan's story isn't just about death. It's about release, a peeling away. And maybe that's why you and I are here tonight, to peel something away. A fear, a pressure, a noise that isn't yours. You don't have to change your life overnight. Neither did I. But if you feel the quiet ache of something not quite right, that's the beginning. That's the candle in Ivan's darkness. And if you thought this story was quiet, wait until I tell you what came next. Because after Ivan, I stopped trying to impress. I started trying to live without lies. Let's keep going. After Ivan, something shifted in me. I had peeled back the layers of death and found a strange clarity. Not joy, not faith, but the tiniest flicker of honesty. And once you catch a glimpse of it, you can't unsee it. I began to feel allergic to lies, not the dramatic ones, no secret double lives, no stolen fortunes, but the soft, daily performances we all give to keep the peace, to be admired, to feel like we belong. So I decided to stop. Stop pretending. Stop pleasing. Stop lying. Try it sometime. It's terrifying. When someone asked, "How are you?" I stopped saying, "Fine." I said, "Lonely, confused, spiritually nauseous." That clears a room faster than cholera. When editors praised my essays, I'd say, I think they're empty. When the Tsar's ministers invited me to dinner, I asked if we'd be serving surf soufflé with a side of inequality. You can imagine how well that went. But I wasn't trying to be difficult. I was trying to be free. And I had a theory that truth, even when it's awkward or painful, might be the only road that leads to real peace. Of course, the problem is, truth makes people very uncomfortable. My friends thought I'd gone mad. My family walked on eggshells. Even my dog seemed suspicious of me. And Sophia, dear, tired Sophia, once threw my diary across the room after reading an entry where I admitted I no longer believed in marriage as a sacred institution. Fair enough. But here's what I discovered. When you stop lying, your world doesn't collapse. It just reshapes. At first, it's brutal. People leave, conversations shrink, invitations vanish. But then something happens. You begin to notice the light differently. You start enjoying silence. You look at a leaf and think, this is enough. Not because the leaf is magic, but because you're finally not trying to be someone else. I also stopped writing fiction for a while. Words felt suspicious. Why make up stories when reality was already a novel written in blood and longing? I spent days in silence. I swept floors. I tended gardens. I tried to live as simply as possible, though, to be fair, simple still included handwritten correspondence with Gandhi and the occasional argument with my children about copyright law. The hardest part, though, wasn't other people. It was me, because I realized that lying isn't just something we do outwardly. We lie to ourselves constantly. I'm generous, I'm moral, I'm wise, I'm over it, I'm fine, that word again. So I stopped saying it, and what took its place was silence. Not cold silence, just room for grief, for doubt, for a kind of tenderness I hadn't felt in decades. I don't want to romanticize it. Living without lies is not glamorous. It's not a TikTok trend. You won't get applause or followers. You'll lose arguments. You'll disappoint people. You'll stare at ceilings and feel like your skin doesn't fit anymore. But you'll sleep better. And isn't that why we're here? I can't promise you enlightenment. I still got angry, still judged, still said things I regretted. But I also began to see truth not as a sword, but as a candle, small, flickering, but warm. And when you light it, even the darkest room begins to soften. So, if you're lying awake tonight, feeling the weight of pretending, know this. You're not alone. Most of us are walking around in borrowed costumes, terrified to take them off. But under all that, there's someone real, someone honest, someone tired maybe, but still glowing faintly in the dark. Maybe that's what you came here to remember. I'll stay with you if you want. We're almost near the end, but not quite. Next, I'll tell you about the night I finally left it all behind. Spoiler, I wore wool socks, packed a single bag, and didn't even say goodbye. I was 82 years old. My beard was white, my hands worn, my bones cracked like old floorboards when I stood. I had written enough words to wrap around the earth. I had raised 13 children, most of them with love, some of them with guilt. I had lived as a nobleman, a soldier, a writer, a prophet, a farmer, a fool, and somehow still a child in search of peace. And one night I left. Not in spirit, in body. I packed a bag, a small one, a few shirts, a notebook, some dried bread. I left a note for Sophia, no explanations, just a goodbye, or maybe a beginning. I wrapped myself in a scarf, took my walking stick, and walked out into the frost. I didn't slam the door. I didn't look back. Why? Because I couldn't breathe anymore. Not in that house. Not in that life. Not in the skin of Count Lev Nikolaevich Tolstoy, the great Russian novelist, the saint in training, the old man of Yasnaya Polyana who lectured on love and truth while arguing about dinner menus and copyrights. I wanted stillness. And so, like a boy sneaking out past curfew, I fled into the night. First by foot, then by train. I remember the station, dim lamps, cold air, a few villagers, curious. No one recognized me. Just an old man with a bag and a haunted face. I traveled with my doctor. He looked worried. I looked relieved. We didn't talk much. The journey wasn't heroic. I didn't find a monastery. I didn't climb a mountain. I got as far as a tiny railway station called Ostapovo. There I collapsed. Pneumonia, they said, or exhaustion, or maybe finally, permission from the universe to rest. I was laid on a narrow cot in the station master's house. Wooden walls, a small stove, a window with frost curling like lace. I had always imagined I'd die in a field or on a bench beneath a tree. But this was fine. Strange, but fine. Word got out. The press arrived. My children rushed in. My disciples hovered. Sophia came eventually. There were tears, accusations, doctors, priests, so many voices, and yet all I heard was the wind outside. I liked the wind. It didn't ask questions. In those final days I spoke very little, not because I was weak, but because I had nothing left to explain. I had spent my whole life trying to say something that would make the world better, but here, at the end, I realized it's not words that matter. It's presence, a hand held, a breath shared, the sound of someone humming in the next room. I remember watching a fly land on the windowsill. I watched it for an hour. It did more good than most books I'd written. People say I ran away. Maybe. Or maybe I finally arrived. Maybe this little station, cold and quiet, was the monastery I'd searched for all along. No icons, no sermons, just me, a window, a blanket, and the hum of a world that keeps turning even when you stop. And maybe that's why I'm here tonight, whispering to you, to remind you it's never too late to leave. A house, a mask, a lie. You don't need a perfect plan. You don't need applause. Sometimes you just need to stand up, pick a direction, and take one quiet step, then another. I don't recommend waiting until you're 82. But if you are, even better. Age is not a wall. It's a doorway. And beyond it, maybe not answers, but air, space, a bench beneath a tree, or a railway station with a window full of frost and peace. And you, still awake, still listening, you don't have to vanish into the night. But maybe, just maybe, there's something you can leave behind. Not everything, just one thing, a burden, a regret, a fear, a false version of yourself you've carried too long. Leave it tonight. I'll keep watch. And while I rest my voice for a moment, let me take you with me to the very last place I ever dreamed of reaching, the quiet lesson I carried to my final breath. So here we are, you and me, one last page, one last breath, one last murmur before the dark wraps its arms around us both. I've told you everything I could about birth, death, war, love, jealousy, truth, hypocrisy, family dinners, existential meltdowns at 3 a.m., about how I tried to be a good man and failed spectacularly, repeatedly, sometimes with style, about how I found peace and lost it over and over again like a sock in the laundry of life. And now, what's left? If you've made it this far, if your eyes are still open, or just barely, I want to offer you not a conclusion, but a companion for your own questions. Because, truthfully, I don't know if there's such a thing as wisdom. What I know is this: every time I tried to control life, it laughed at me. And every time I surrendered to love, to honesty, to simplicity, I felt something like peace, briefly, like a snowflake on the tongue, melting, vanishing, and yet unforgettable. I used to think I'd change the world. Now I think, if you can change one evening, just one, bring a little light to someone who can't sleep, that's already a miracle. Here's what I believe, if anything: every kind gesture matters, even if it's forgotten. Every child deserves to be seen, even if they don't say thank you. Every truth, no matter how small, makes the world a little lighter. And every soul, especially the tired, the anxious, the lost at night, deserves someone to sit with them in the dark and whisper, "You're not alone." That's all I ever wanted, and all I failed to say 1,000 times. Do you know what I remember most at the end? Not the reviews, not the speeches, not the pages. But one day, quietly, anonymously, I watched a farmer give his last piece of bread to a beggar. No hesitation, no audience, just love, real, unedited, unclipped love. That, my dear friend, was the most beautiful thing I ever witnessed. I've been many men: the boy with a noble name and no parents, the writer hungry for greatness, the husband torn between tenderness and silence, the old man running away from his own statue. But under all that, I was just someone trying to be whole. And maybe you are too. Maybe that's what this night was about. You're not broken, you're becoming. So take your time, go slow. Don't rush to be wise or pure or strong. Start with small things. Feel the sheets around you. Breathe. Listen to your own heartbeat. If it's still there, you still have time. You don't need a new identity. You don't need to delete the past. You just need to notice this moment, right here, where something soft and sacred still lingers. And if your eyelids are getting heavy now, if the room is tilting gently into dreams, then I've done my job. Not to teach, not to lecture, just to be here until your own soul was quiet enough to hear itself. But if you're still awake, just barely, I'll leave you with this: be kind, be honest, be silly if you must. Pet stray dogs, write letters you don't send, say thank you to the moon, dance barefoot in your kitchen when no one's looking, and every once in a while leave your life for a little while, just to remember how sweet it is to return. You've been a beautiful listener. And now, may your sleep be deep, your dreams forgiving, and your heart light as a dandelion on the wind. I'll be here if you need me again. Just press play. Take care, my friend.